I look at protein as a fat loss nutrient. One, that makes you feel fuller. And two, protein helps the body burn more calories. The energy balance would say, if you eat more calories, you're going to gain weight. Well, that's not true in all situations because
Dr. Bill Campbell is a world-leading expert in fat loss and protein science.
He's published over 200 papers and spent decades uncovering the truth.
Today, he's revealing the missing link to real results.
How much protein do people need to eat every day?
So my recommendations are twofold. One, it's going to optimize for fat loss. And two, it's going to optimize for gaining as much lean mass as possible. So, oh, my body's different, or this isn't working. I mean, fat loss, it's slow. It doesn't happen. And I know this because I struggle with this and I go all over the world and speak about fat loss. And when we talk about losing body fat, there's two processes that have to occur. One is we have to liberate
Caffeine. Is that really good for fat loss?
I'm going to go with...
What do you think the number one mistake is that people make if they want to lose fat?
If you do that, I will promise you, you will have noticed fat loss. And if I'm wrong, there's something wrong.
Most people think that fat loss is all about restriction, drastically cutting your calories, or maybe even endless cardio. But what if the opposite were correct? What if you were able to eat more, but more of the right foods to allow your body to burn its own body fat? And at the center of it all is protein, the most overlooked nutrient for fat loss. And this strategy will work even if you're carnivore, even if you're keto, and even if you're low carb. My guest today is Dr. Bill Campbell. He's a leading researcher on fat loss, and he'll explain how protein can accelerate your fat loss results, exactly how much you need every single day, and the number one food that will drive your results, as well as protein timing. So Dr. Campbell, my first question, as a fat loss scientist who understands this area very deeply, do you think that people can lose more fat faster on a high protein diet?
Yes. I look at protein as a fat loss nutrient. And I don't just say that because I like protein. I actually wish proteins were carbs. I like eating carbs a lot more than protein. And it's difficult for people to consume higher amounts of protein. So again, I don't like saying that because it's more difficult to have people eat higher protein. But we have enough research and enough mechanistic data and enough outcome data where people lose more fat when they optimize their protein intake, or even in studies when they're even eating optimal, even if they eat more in certain studies, they lose body fat.
Very exciting. I mean, I love protein. I don't have a problem eating enough protein, but I get it that many people cannot eat enough protein, which we'll talk about how much we actually need a bit later. So question for you. If we had the choice of the different macros, fat, protein, and carbs, now which one out of that is the most important that people need to focus on if they want to lose fat?
I'm going to go with calories first. So make sure that you're not overeating. And once we have that clarified, you anchor your diet around protein. So you set your protein first, and then based on your preference, carbs or fats and again, this is a body composition perspective. We're trying to lose body fat. So I anchor with protein. I'm a protein anchored, flexible dieting advocate.
Okay, I just thought I'll ask that question because you know how some people favor more low carb or ketogenic, some people favor more high carb, but this conversation is really about the emphasis on protein and why it is so important. And not many people talk about the importance of protein.
Let me add one thing to that, which is interesting, and it builds off that statement. A lot of people, when they discuss, or let's just say when they fight about the major cause of obesity related to diet, you have people that say it's about the fat, and you have people say it's about the carbs. Nobody ever argues or puts forth a hypothesis that protein is part of the obesity epidemic. And there is evidence, or there's a theory that places protein at the forefront of the obesity epidemic as well. So I agree with you. And it's an interesting thing that people just skip or ignore protein despite the research that we have.
Absolutely. I think the more of a uniform consensus that we have on health and the more that we can be in agreement, the better it is. So protein and probably eating unprocessed foods. So I want to understand why. Why is it that protein is so good for fat loss? What's the mechanism behind it?
I don't fully know, and I don't think anybody fully knows, but it essentially addresses, just broadly speaking, it essentially addresses everything you would want it to do for the energy balance equation. So what do I mean by that? So if you optimize protein intake, one, that helps people consume less food. And two, protein is the most thermogenic nutrient, meaning that it helps the body burn more calories. And in a way, one of the benefits of low carb or ketogenic diets is, and I think this is one of the primary benefits, it suppresses appetite better than any other type of diet. Well, protein as a nutrient does the same thing. Protein makes you feel fuller so that you eat less food. So there's the energy inside of the energy balance equation. And it also burns more calories because protein it's the only nutrient, macronutrient that has nitrogen elements or amino bonds within its chemical structure. And when you consume protein, the body has to work very hard or harder to break apart these peptide bonds, these nitrogen atoms. It works harder, so it takes more energy to digest, absorb, transport protein compared to carbs and fats. So not only are you eating less calories, you're also burning more calories when you have an optimal protein diet.
Interestingly, so is it that also that if you eat more protein relative to fat or carbohydrates, that you are essentially eating more food? Maybe it's less calories, and that's another debate that people talk about. Is it calories? Is it not? Is it hormones? But nevertheless, if you're eating more protein, you are physically eating more food that has potentially lower calories. Is that also part of it?
I think that depends on where the person's choosing to get their protein sources from. So if they're getting it all from a protein supplement, well, then they're not eating as much food. When I say that, I'm not denigrating. I rely on protein supplements to meet my daily protein goals. So I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But if somebody's focusing on food only for optimizing their protein, then yes, I would agree with that.
Interesting. Okay, let's understand fat loss and how the body actually burns fat. I think people would love to learn this because I have so many people in my ketogenic group saying, I want to burn fat. How do I burn fat? So how does the body, if you have fat cells that are circulating in the body and they work functionally, when you want to lose fat, body fat, what's actually happening in the body?
I like to break this down into two main processes. And I just literally talked about this in my graduate sports nutrition class like 3 days ago. So fresh on my mind. So we have fat tissue, adipose tissue is what scientists call it, all throughout our body. The goal is to reduce that and burn it for energy so that we end up losing fat. So when we talk about losing body fat, there's two processes that have to occur. One is we have to liberate the fat from our fat cells. That means we have to break it down so that later it can be burned for energy. And that's when we actually will lose body fat. So that first part is called lipolysis. Lipolysis happens in the fat tissues, the fat cells, and it's breaking down, literally breaking down or liberating the fatty acids. And I'll explain what that is in a moment, that can later be used for energy. So in our fat cells, we store fat as the primary constituent is a triglyceride. So I always use this as an example. I put up my fingers like this, and the body can't do anything with a triglyceride. It can't burn triglycerides. So we have 1, 2, 3 fatty acids, and then they're attached to a glycerol backbone. And what we need to do is take off each of these fatty acids so that they're free. So we call these free fatty acids. Once that happens, now they're able to be burned for energy and ultimately fat loss. Now, the process of doing this, taking off the first, the second, and the third fatty acid, we call that lipolysis or fat breakdown. Now, that at this point, we haven't lost any fat yet. We've liberated it. We've set the table, or we set the condition where the body can burn it, but nothing has been burned yet. So this is where I love like exercise or dieting, a caloric deficit. These situations now will take, or they attract these fatty acids, and let's just say muscle, since I'm an exercise person, other organs do as well. But in a caloric deficit state, or if you're moving your body needs more energy, and it will, I'm going to say, attract these fatty acids to the muscle. They make their way into the mitochondria, where now they're effectively just chopped up for energy. That process is called beta oxidation. And what that's doing is that's just using the fat that used to be stored in our fat cells, but now it's saying, hey, I need energy. You're eating less calories. I need to get energy to keep you alive from somewhere. Let's use the fat that you stored, since there's a ton of energy there. And it literally just breaks apart these fatty acids. So just to get a little more technical, a fatty acid chain, the ones that we took off the triglyceride, they're typically like 18 carbons long. And when they go through this process called beta oxidation, they just go through a circular system where they just get chopped down into smaller and smaller pieces. And as that's happening, we're creating ATP, or energy, to keep us alive. So that's the general two-step process: lipolysis, then beta oxidation to lose fat. Now, real quick, we also have lipogenesis occurring at the same time, where we're also building fat. So if you're not in a deficit, or you're not physically active, at the end of the day, you might be building just as much as you're breaking down, which is why, again, energy balance really has a large role in dictating whether you're going to lose fat or gain fat.
Interesting. Now, I have spoken to many different experts in the field of fat loss, and your theory and your explanation primarily revolves around being in a calorie deficit or exercising, which is the energy model. But then you have other people that talk about the aspect of hormones, particularly insulin. Now, my audience is going to say, Dr. Campbell, it's all about insulin. It's not about calories. But if you speak with Dr. Jason Fung, which I'm not sure you know him, but he says it's about the hormones first that feed the calories. And I'd love to get your take on that in terms of where does insulin and hormones fit in the piece of fat loss?
Yeah, so I would start by saying I'm no fan of a highly processed high carbohydrate diet, especially in sedentary people. So the worst type of diet someone can eat would be one that is very high carbohydrate and that's highly processed. Based on the insulin, I'll just say the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity, using that as a guide. And let me also say, I like ketogenic diets. I've used ketogenic diets myself. So I'm not by any means anti-ketogenic diet. I just don't see the evidence for saying that the insulin itself is causing fat gain. So my evidence would be every single study ever published, whether there's 4,000, 12,000, 30,000 studies, when they put people in a caloric deficit, on average, every single study ever published, the people lose body fat. Now, and I haven't published this yet, but I did a case study on myself, and it was like 18 months of my life. I purposefully lowered my protein, increased my carbs, eating very high processed foods. I tracked every gram of carbohydrate. So I essentially tried to keep insulin as high as I could, but I was in a caloric deficit and I lost significant amounts of body weight. So I did the experiment on myself, which I think that's further evidence that no, it's the calories that are the most important. And again, so I would cite all of the studies done. That doesn't mean, because I don't ever want to be, I'm anti-keto. No, a ketogenic diet is the best diet to control hunger. What's the main contributor to obesity epidemic? People overeat in this obesogenic environment. So if you're able to adhere to a ketogenic diet, I think that's the best choice for a lot of people because of the fact that it lowers hunger. And ketogenic diets typically tend to be higher in protein intake, which is, I know, the main focus of our conversation today. So you get all of those benefits as well.
Perfect. I hope that makes sense for people. Understanding that from the endpoint of fat loss, not talking about health, not talking about insulin resistance or visceral fat, just fat loss. This is a key distinction. And when we are in the health space, we have to be very understanding of what is the endpoint. Is it body composition? Is it fat loss? Is it muscle gain? Or are we talking about health? And that's where we have like people like Lane Norton can say, just eat mostly unprocessed foods, but you can have some processed foods, but control your calories. But he's not talking about just your ultimate health. It's a different subject. So I hope that makes sense for people, but you're in favor of a ketogenic diet, which is awesome. I'm on a ketogenic diet. And so it really helps me control my calories without overly thinking about it. But this conversation is about protein. So I appreciate that point of view. So question for you. You mentioned how we break down fat. Now, when we talk about eating more protein, controlling the calories, where does the fat come from? Is it body fat? Is it visceral fat or like liver fat? Where does it come from?
So the body in a caloric deficit, or let's just say a negative energy balance, because you could be exercising to put yourself in that state. It's relying on stored body fat. So where do we store body fat? Three main areas. Adipose tissue, or just, it's the fat that we can pinch under our skin. That's where like 97.5% of all stored body fat is. Then we have IMTG stores. So that's intramuscular triglyceride stores. That's like 2.4% of all the body fat is stored in our muscles. And then a very, very small amount is just, I don't even think you would call it storage, but it's free fatty, it's plasma free fatty acids, plasma triglycerides. It's the amount of fat in the blood. Now the liver is the major organ for all metabolism. So the liver processes all incoming food, creating fat, lipogenesis, gluconeogenesis when you're on a low carb diet. So the liver is involved in all of the metabolism of this. But the fat that we're burning is mostly coming from stored body fat.
Okay, I think many people would love to burn the stored body fat. Let's talk about then protein and understanding how protein can aid in fat loss. So first question, getting a deep dive into protein. How much protein do people need to eat every day?
So I live in a world where I prioritize muscle, or I look at the body as a whole. So body composition. So I'm factoring in people who embrace a health or a physically active or fitness lifestyle. So let me say that. So if somebody's sedentary and they never exercise, they never lift a weight, my recommendations may not apply to them, although I could make the argument that they still would. So my recommendations are twofold. One, it's going to optimize for fat loss, and two, it's going to optimize for gaining as much lean mass as possible. So I recommend a range of protein intakes, and that range is 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And for our American friends, that's 0.75 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight.
Easy. Okay. Now, is there a maximum? Like, is there an amount that is too much, that is not safe, that you should never go past? Because some people might be able to eat a lot of protein.
Yeah, in healthy people, there's no evidence that higher protein intakes are unhealthy. And again, me being I'll just say a protein advocate, I don't ever want to tell somebody to consume something in higher amounts than typical if there's a chance that it's harmful to their health. Like I have daughters. I don't want to tell them, hey, eat, let's make sure we get protein in this meal if it's potentially harmful. So I spend a lot of time trying to find harm from higher protein diets. And occasionally, and I have people reach out, they'll say, hey, this study shows it's very unhealthy. And it's before I even look at the study, which I always do. I just predict this is a correlation study where I could have found 29 things if I wanted to. Any intervention-based study when they have high protein diets. So not just spurious findings from intervention study or from correlation studies. When you give people high versus low protein and you follow them for a year or longer, and you take blood work, you're looking at clinical health markers, you're looking at kidney function, you never see adverse health outcomes. So that's the best science. That's a science that you want to rely on. I'm also suggesting that my recommendations are for healthy people. If you have end-stage renal disease, maybe not. So again, my audience is a physically active, healthy population. So zero evidence of higher protein diets being unhealthy. In fact, I tell my students in my sports nutrition class, and in my weight management class, if they can find one study where it showed health harm or adverse health outcomes, that they get an A. Like you're done for the semester. You can go home now.
Well, they probably can't find anything.
I mean, again, I would love to know if that study exists, but it only exists in the studies that I'll just say you can make them find whatever you want to find generally. Now, let me also say this. Those are also the studies that we rely on for that smoking is bad for our health. So I don't want to say that all correlation studies are garbage. But whenever you find weird findings, they're always from those studies. I just happen to believe that the smoking studies, but again, we have plenty of data in smoke intervention studies. Not with lung cancer per se, you have to rely on correlational data, but it increases inflammation, et cetera, et cetera. So
now, as Dr. Campbell mentions, protein is so important for fat loss and also for your health. But you might be thinking, well, Rina, what else do I need to be eating? Do I eat carbs with my protein, or do I eat fat with my protein? Or is it a mixture of both? Now, according to doctors that you would know, like Dr. Eric Berg and Dr. Ken Berry, if you are metabolically damaged, meaning that you have high glucose, elevated insulin, the best strategy for people like you would be a low carb to a zero carb diet. So under 50 grams of carbs or even close to 0 grams of carbs. Now with a zero carb or a carnivore diet, I have seen so many success stories, people losing so much weight and even reversing chronic conditions like heart failure, thyroid issues, diabetes, insulin resistance, all while eating more food and more calories. And I experienced this myself when I went carnivore 5 years ago. But what I found kept myself and all my community on track was medical support through all of the carnivore doctors, including the ones that you see on this health podcast. And that's why I created a private online community. It's called Go Carnivore. It's completely off social media. And this is where you can get support from these medical doctors and ask all of your questions. One of the best things about the community are our monthly challenges. We do things like our high fat challenge, our protein challenge, and our dairy free challenge. And this month is our step challenge. And this is where our members get the best results. So if you want to try carnivore and get the medical support, just head to gocarnivore.com and get your free 14-day challenge and your free meal plan. Okay, so very evident that high protein is safe for a healthy, active population. And just for my audience, if they're sedentary, we don't want to be sedentary. We want to be walking and moving at the least. So movement is so important for health and also to liberate fat and your fat cells. So question, you mentioned your studies. So you do studies in your labs. So is it high protein irrespective of calories? Because I think you did a study in people that even though their calories were higher, they increased their protein, they lost body fat.
Yes. Yeah. Not just my lab has found this. So earlier we talked about the energy balance equation and the data that some of the studies I published or some of the other studies that I rely on, it's almost like there's a protein caveat or a protein condition where the energy balance would say, if you eat more calories, you're going to gain weight. Well, that's not true in all situations because when the nutrient that is being overconsumed or increased in the diet is protein, we have multiple studies reporting no gain in body fat and some studies a loss of body fat, even though you've consumed more calories. It's fascinating. It shouldn't work like that, but we have multiple studies that report that.
I think if more people would understand that, they'd probably overeat on your protein. Go have a steak and then overeat on your calories versus fat or carbohydrates. And not saying that fat or carbs is bad, but if you want to achieve fat loss, overeat your protein. So question about timing of protein. If you eat your protein in one big bolus in one day, let's just say it's 100 grams of protein, does your body absorb all that protein?
When I get asked that question, I think historically people, when they say the word absorb, what they really mean is, can that protein be used for muscle protein synthesis? Now, that might not be the case in all situations, but as an exercise scientist, that's usually what I think the context is. Because when we say absorb, your body's going to absorb whatever you give it. If I eat 1,000 grams of protein, my body's going to absorb it. Doesn't mean it's going to utilize all of it. Doesn't mean that it's all going to go to my muscles. If I eat 1,000 or 10,000 grams of carbs, my body's going to absorb it. It's going to process it. So I always want to set the context for what do we mean by absorb. So let's assume that the person means if I eat all my protein in one meal, will my body use that for building muscle? And the answer is the more and more protein we eat, the higher and higher muscle protein synthesis response we get. So the answer generally is yes. You eat more protein, you get more of a protein synthetic response. However, the more and more protein you eat, the less and less of this benefit that you get. So if you see this curve, the best benefit is when you go from the lower to the moderate, and then from the moderate to the optimal. And as you keep going above optimal amounts, the benefits are just so little. So yes, we had a study that they gave subjects 100 grams of protein versus 25 in one sitting. They had them resistance train, and they had 4 times more protein, so 400% more protein, but it was something like a 30% increase in muscle protein synthesis. So it was a really well-designed study. I love the study, but it really highlighted, yes, if you have one big meal, you get a lot of benefit, but it's not proportional to the amount of protein. So it wasn't like muscle wasn't 400% greater in muscle protein synthesis.
So then if you have a big bolus of protein as opposed to have protein dispersed in meals, so like 3 to 4 meals, then can the body use that protein better?
If the goal is for muscle building, what we know is that an approximately equal distribution of protein across the day is better than an unequal distribution. So I'll phrase it like this. 3 breakfast, lunch, dinner is better than the same amount of protein in one meal. And here's some context to this. I love food. So I design my eating lifestyle more so around preventing hunger and trying to lose body fat or not gain body fat. I prioritize that over building every ounce of muscle that I could build. Now I still build muscle, hopefully, or maintain it. So what I'll do, if I know, let's say that four protein feedings per day is optimal for building muscle. But I also know if I do that, if I have 4 moderate sized meals per day and I'm just hungry all day, but I do much better on 2 large meals, that's what I'm going to do. I want a huge meal around 11. I want another huge meal around 6. Maybe I sacrificed a couple grams of lean tissue, but what I've done is I don't feel as hungry throughout. I'm less likely to overeat on that. So I put this in the context of, let's say, a nutrition coach or health coach. What's your client's goals? What are their struggles? And let's try to come up with the best plan around. There is a perfect plan. The perfect plan is probably 3 to 4 protein feedings throughout the day. But I know for myself, that's not ideal because then I'm hungry all day.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that's very much my audience because they mostly eat 2 meals a day if they follow low carb to ketogenic diet because they're simply not hungry. As you said, it's the most satiating lifestyle that you can have because the protein is higher, the fat is higher, and you're having less ultra processed foods. So having said that, now the question about fat loss, would it be more optimal than to have eat when you feel hungry? So if it's twice a day and that makes you feel really full, do that. Doesn't mean that you should eat once a day to fuel more fat loss. Does that make sense? My question?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'll give just some a practical response to that. I do think, I know, when you research meal frequency and so I always ask my students this too. So let's say the research study is, and let's not talk about carbs or fat. So everything's just the same here. So carbs, fat, protein is the same throughout the day. You give people 6 meals per day or 3 meals per day. The research would suggest, based on just hunger levels, half the studies will say that eating 6 meals per day makes people feel fuller. The other half of the studies say no, eating smaller or less frequent, larger meals makes people feel fuller. When I ask my students this question, it's almost always, and I've been doing this for over a decade, I ask them this question: are you fuller eating smaller meals throughout the day or the other way? And it's about 50-50. So back to your question, I think there's a individualistic variable response to meal frequency and meal size and controlling hunger. So very practical example. I grew up in my life reading constantly how important breakfast is to starting your day. So my whole early adult life, I would always eat breakfast. I wasn't really hungry, but I would eat breakfast because that's what I thought I should do. And I already admitted I have whatever Ozempic is supposed to help, like lower the food noise.
You're so lucky. I don't have that at all. I have the opposite. Like I have this massive appetite and I have to increase, honestly, my protein really high to feel full. Like I just don't feel full. Anyway, go on. I'm sorry. I have like food, like, yes, I'm constantly thinking about food. Like I'm hungry. You're like me. Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah. Thank you. But you're smart because you follow the best diet to help with that, which is a ketogenic diet. See, I don't eat high carb, but I wouldn't say what I do is low carb either. So for all these years, I'm eating breakfast and then I'm starving at lunch. I'm starving at dinner. And then I asked myself, and I remember this, it was earlier in my career. I'm like, I'm going to find all the research on the importance of eating breakfast and how it suppresses hunger. And I couldn't find, there was nothing on the importance of breakfast. So I'm like, that's weird. Like, told this my whole life. And so what I did was I said, okay, I'm not hungry in the morning. Why am I eating? I know I'm very hungry around noon. So rather than have these 700 or 800 calories for breakfast, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have a much larger lunch meal. And I started doing that, and man, things were so much. And this is to this day, I don't eat my first meal until around 11 or 12 every day. And it's a large meal. And the other thing, which I think you probably live in your community, when you fast, or even if you eat low carbs, you're able to focus a lot better. You don't have the lower energy, the insulin spike, and, which then lowers blood glucose. So I'm able to focus better with this. My daughter, my wife, they have to have breakfast. If they don't get breakfast, they don't function well. So I think it is, for whatever reason, very individualized. And I think it makes sense. Find out where you are on this. Do I need breakfast? Do I want smaller meals? Where are you on this spectrum? And lean into that. Regardless of which meal timing strategy you come up with. Let's say you're like me and it's 2 large meals per day, or it's 5 large meals per day, whatever it is for you. There was a very well-designed study when they had people who ate consistent meal patterns. So they ate, I think it was, let's just say 4 meals every single day. And the other group, they averaged 4. Sometimes it was 2. Sometimes it was 6. Sometimes it was 4. Sometimes it was 8. Sometimes it was 1. When it was irregular versus a consistent pattern, At the end of the study, they did a food test to see how many calories they burned from a test meal. And there was a significant difference in being consistent or having your meals at regular times. Your body was burned significantly more calories from each meal, such that it was a significant difference, such that over time, you do this meal after meal, day after day, you would get a tangible body fat reduction outcome.
That explains a lot because, I personally do my first meal around 9 or 10, then about 1 or 2, and then maybe 6 p.m. So, and then everyone is different. And it would explain why some people, even in my community, they'll say, look, I can just eat 2 meals or 1 meal. But then you have other people that say, I just can't eat enough protein. So I have to eat smaller meals, or I can't break down the food. So there's all these variations based on what you said. So question for you now, if people do fasting, I had a previous conversation with Dr. Donald Lehman. This question came up in the YouTube comments around, well, I do prolonged fasting. So maybe it's over 24 hours or a few days fasting. Do you need daily protein to have for the fat loss and for your health and lean muscle? Or is it an average over a week if you're doing fasting?
Based on the acute data of fasting that I'm aware of, and I'm not going to go into the health benefits of this or adverse health outcomes because I just don't study those. I study muscle and fat tissue. Fasting is a catabolic environment. There is nothing about fasting that's anabolic. It's just not. Your body will need to break down tissue to help or to address the fact that you're not getting calories. Now, a catabolic environment is a great environment for fat loss. What we don't want is a catabolic environment relative to our lean mass. So I'll phrase it like this because I used to be much more in a bodybuilding community myself in my audience. If your goal is to maximize as much muscle mass as you possibly can every day, fasting is probably not something you want to do for extended periods of time. But if you don't care about maximizing every gram, which unless you're a competitive bodybuilder, I don't know if you need to live your life like that. It's a very demanding lifestyle to do that. I know I've lived it. I've done it. So extended periods of fasting, again, there may be tons of health benefits, which just make the muscle component here, what I'm going to say, irrelevant. Are you actually losing lean mass? Maybe not. Now, again, I want to speak to my competitive bodybuilder. Are you gaining as much as you possibly can? I would say confidently no. Let me talk about a study we're doing now, which it's not fasting, but it's at least within the realm. So what we're doing is we're putting middle-aged women, so these would be menopausal aged women, on a very severe diet for 4 straight days. And the diet is essentially 100% protein. So we tell them to do is the only calories we want you to eat is protein for 4 straight days. And the protein goal is 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. So they're eating, these women, around 3 to 400 calories per day of all protein. We do say, hey, if there's some, a few carbs or a few grams of fat, that's fine, but we don't want you adding ketchup or things like that, or getting higher fat meat. So this is a protein only diet to the extent that it's humanly possible. And in addition to those 4 days, we also have them walk 6 hours per day for these 4 days. And there's no resistance training. The walking's the only thing. And I would have thought going into the study, we finished 9 subjects so far. I would have thought they're going to lose lean mass on this protocol because 1, they're all resistance trained. So we're removing that for these 3 days or for these 4 days. We're essentially starving them, and they didn't lose muscle. In fact, most of the subjects, and again, there's only been 9 so far, they've actually gained lean mass over this protocol, which is weird, but when it happens, I think it's happened in every single subject after 7 days. We put most of our reliance, once they come back off of the 4 days, we take them back to their maintenance calories for 3 days before we retest them, because their inflammation is so jacked up that you're not going to get great body composition data. So we bring them back to normal, get things stabilized, and then we test them. We also have them come back a month later, telling them do whatever you want during that month. Go back to your training, eat whatever food, to make sure that we didn't cause fat overshoot, which is a situation where other research, when you starve people, they almost always gain more fat back than what they started with, because crash dieting is not a good thing to do. And in every case, they still have fat loss. Like they didn't gain the fat back. They're still down with fat. We did have one subject, only one. She did gain some lean, or she lost a little bit of lean mass, but she chose to rerun the extreme diet again during her 30 days of doing whatever she wanted to do.
Interesting. So just my audience to understand what you're saying is that not saying that people should eat 300-400 calories a day. It's just to reiterate that in a calorie controlled or deficit environment, if you increase your protein, and even if you're moving, you will still maintain your lean muscle mass. So it's not a recommendation for my audience. It's just to show the importance of protein in your study.
Yeah, definitely. This is not a diet that
No.
I would suggest. I mean, it's under very tight research controlled environment, but I think I was making a broader argument about extended periods of fasting where you lose all of your muscle. Even though ours wasn't pure fasting, they did not lose muscle. So I wouldn't be scared that you're destroying your lean mass if you're doing extended periods of fasting, as long as it's intermittent. If you're doing, extended periods of fasting all the time, I think you're going to lose lean mass in that situation.
Okay, very well balanced answer. I like that, so that people can do their fasting, but they need to be mindful of their protein needs. So your study is great to understand that fasting does not kill your protein, as some people might say. Okay, next question. Well, if we're talking about protein, what is the best protein foods that people need to eat to lose fat?
10 years ago or five years ago, I would have said they have to be animal sources of protein. So, another way to say that is not plant sources of protein. However, what we now have more research on this. Animal sources are the best. They have the highest amount of essential amino acids, the highest amount of the most branched chain amino acids. That say the ones that are more involved in the anabolic actions of skeletal muscle. So animal sources are the best. But if you eat more of the lower quality plant sources, pea protein, potato protein, rice protein, if you consume more of that, you get the same benefit as a lower amount of animal sources. So again, what's the best source? I'm not going to ever tell somebody who doesn't want to consume animal protein that they have to optimize their body composition. But they have to be educated, and they're going to have to consume more, because plant sources of protein lack some of the essential amino acids.
Well, my audience tends to love meat, as do I. So I think animal protein for the win. What do you think would be the number one animal protein that people can focus on to have the best, I guess, feeling full and the best fat loss outcome? Best animal protein.
Yeah, I would say dairy.
Really?
Dairy protein is casein and whey. We have several studies, and again, relative to fat loss, I'm aware of 2 studies. One of these was a dissertation out of the University of Oklahoma. So whey protein has unique fat burning, fat loss characteristics, according to 2 studies. Both of these were whey protein hydrolysate studies. Yeah. This other study was in older women. I think they were 50 to 80 years old. Whey protein versus hydrolylated whey protein, which is basically just means it's enzymatically altered or pre-digested so that it's digested faster. They also lost more body fat under the same research conditions. So relying on this data that whey protein, we know it's the highest level of leucine. So it's the most anabolic protein source. And having this knowledge of, well, we have some research which suggests that whey protein also has unique lipolytic or fat loss characteristics. That's why. And then casein, what we know about casein seems to, again, relying on a few human-based studies, seems to be the best source for an anti-catabolic protein, meaning that you lose less lean mass or you suppress muscle protein breakdown. I'm not aware of anybody identifying the exact peptide chains in casein protein that has done this, but we see it in several human-based trials. So when I look at this evidence, that's dairy protein. What is dairy protein? It's casein and whey. And then if you look at human breast milk, it's also casein and whey, but the ratios are flipped. You have a lot more whey than you do casein, whereas dairy, it's mostly casein. It's like 80% casein, 20% whey. I personally, and again, I'm a protein researcher, I'm a fat loss researcher, I make zero effort to go out of I don't know if any of these events are tangible. If you totally change around your protein strategies I want to get all this way, I don't think it matters at the end of the day. But if I'm asked the question and I have knowledge of these studies and I have to say which one's the best, well, I'm going to say whey and casein. But if I love fish and I love chicken which I eat a lot of chicken, or I love steak and that's where I'm getting my protein, do that. I don't think it matters. I think it matters what your total daily protein intake is. I'm not going to get too uptight about where you're getting that protein, unless you're not eating meat. And then I already made the statement, you better be getting more of the others.
It's so interesting because you're a scientist and you probably are so articulate with what you say. It's amazing. You're so well balanced. But when you said the dairy, I thought, what? Like, are you talking about yogurt and cheese? And people are going to be thinking that. So whey and casein. But as you said, steak, seafood, chicken, the good old meats and proteins that people love to eat more of that.
I think it's better to have that list of protein sources that you just mentioned rather than a protein supplement, if you can do that. I don't do that. So I rely on, I take whey protein supplements just out of convenience, etc. But you just mentioned a food first approach, which I like that as the best approach. Food first. If you struggle, use a supplement.
Me too. Okay. Last question about protein. Now, if people eat more protein, they're going to say, Dr. Campbell, it's going to raise my insulin levels. And so protein related to insulin, is there a concern around that?
I don't think so. I mean, if it were a concern for me, I would address that in all of my studies. Now, whey protein is insulinogenic, but I mean, protein also increases glucagon as well. And if we look at, let's just say whey protein for a moment, whey protein does increase insulin, but insulin's anti-catabolic, so it suppresses muscle protein breakdown. So that's a good thing for muscle. The other thing is, if you're getting your protein from foods rather than just supplements, that's going to have you're going to get less of an insulinogenic effect when you have, other nutrients with your protein intake. I just don't see and again, I appreciate maybe a lot in your community is worried about that. I just don't make a consideration for it. I don't have any evidence to suggest that it matters.
I understand. When you increase your protein, it doesn't necessarily cause more insulin spikes. The level of inflammation in the body is what causes these elevated insulin spikes, followed by elevated glucose levels. So it's interesting that when you step out of the ketogenic realm and you talk to people that eat carbohydrates and they're active, they eat whole unprocessed carbohydrates. Maybe they might have some processed, but majority is unprocessed. If they eat carbs and some protein, they're healthy. But if they eat fats and protein, they can also be healthy. It's the mixture of fat, protein, and carb which causes health problems, including elevated levels of insulin. I just want to make that point so that people can understand that it's not the protein and high protein causing high insulin. It's something else if you have elevated insulin. And processed foods, ultra-processed foods is part of it. Also eating fat and carbohydrates with the protein, like McDonald's, is going to cause the problem. not having a steak, if that makes sense, or too much steak. So just to give people context. Next topic, caffeine. Is that really good for fat loss?
It's a moderate fat loss agent. So I want to start with that. But it does everything you would want it to do to induce fat loss. So when I start with that one, people are like, oh, how many caffeine pills can I take? So caffeine is not a massive body fat agent or chemical. It's moderate, but it does everything you'd want it to do to lose fat. It is awesome. That being said, I don't like relying on caffeine for myself. If I was a bodybuilder, I would. If I was stepping on a stage, I would. But I like to just rely on food choices, my movement. But again, caffeine does help with fat loss. Yes.
And how much caffeine a day is like optimal where it's not too much?
I get angry because we almost have zero research, which is surprising, on studying caffeine alone for fat loss. So, and I've spent a lot of time on this topic and this is why I'm very optimistic about caffeine. I know what it does. The dosage that I have come up with based on the limited amount of research that I could find is about 4 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. So for most people, that's going to be around 200 to 400 milligrams of caffeine in one dose. And then you ask, well, how many doses? Well, again, no research. I would suggest 1 to 2 doses a day. Being careful if you take that later in the day. Some people then have trouble sleeping. So practical advice would say take a dose in the morning, take a dose in the afternoon, early afternoon, to maximize the fat burning effects of caffeine. And caffeine, I will also say, it also has a nutrient partitioning effect, which means it not only causes you to burn more calories, but it causes, of those calories being burned, more of them are coming from fat and less than carbs. So it's again, when I said it does everything you would want it to do for fat loss, fat burning, and fat loss. So remember, lipolysis, it's doing that. And it's also increasing the oxidation or the burning of those fatty acids.
Okay. Well, I like meat and I love caffeine. Now, caffeine, how much coffee, if I want to have a black coffee, how many of those a day?
See, I don't drink coffee. I'm one of those weird people. So I don't have
Really?
a large. Yeah.
That's weird. I think honestly, I thought that 97% of people drink coffee every day. You're not one of them?
No, I would be one of the 3%. My wife's the same way.
Wow. The Campbell family is a strange bunch, but they're a smart bunch, but they're a strange bunch. So, okay, let's just say that if you have a takeaway coffee, I think it's like 100 milligrams of caffeine. I'm really not sure, but let's just give a caveat that it's black coffee. It's not milky coffee, and don't put lots of butter in the coffee because that's going to negate the fat loss effects.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Any other notes on caffeine to help the audience around fat loss?
Let me just briefly say it has a mild appetite suppressing effect. So it's going to help you not be as hungry. So eat less food. That's good. And on the other side of the equation, it helps you burn more total calories throughout the day. It increases the amount of calories you're burning at rest. It helps you burn more calories during exercise. It helps you burn more calories with a meal. So if you have it with a meal, you'll burn more calories. So it helps you eat moderately fewer calories. It helps you burn more calories, and it helps you burn more calories from fat. So it is awesome. And if you do use it for exercise, how your body perceives how hard it is. So the effort that you're doing during exercise, it makes it not feel as hard. So that ties into you burn more calories if you take it during exercise as well.
Perfect. Well, I just have my morning cup of coffee, just 1 or 2 in the morning, and that's it. But it's interesting that you're not a caffeine guy. Very interesting. Okay. Last question. Exercise. What is the best exercise to lose lots of fat?
Cardio. If the goal is to lose fat this week, next week, yes. So we just published a study on this. And I didn't want cardio to win. I don't like cardio. I prefer to lift weights 10 to 1 over cardio. Now I would also suggest if somebody's trying to change their body, you lift weights. that's the only mode of exercise that will change the shape of your body. But if the question is, I want to lose as much fat from an exercise mode, cardio will burn more fat. Now, let me also give one more nerdy perspective on this. If you do lift weights and you build muscle and you do lose fat, your overall body fat percentage may be improved because of lifting weights compared to cardio. But that's a different question than which one burns more fat or which one will cause more fat loss. It's cardio. And that's not surprising when you look at if I do an hour of lifting and I do an hour of cardio. When I do an hour of cardio, I'm literally moving my body for 60 minutes. When I do an hour of lifting, how many minutes out of those 60 am I actually moving my body? 10, 20 at the, like, you know what I'm saying? Like resistance training is intermittent in nature. You lift, you recover, you lift, you recover. So when you look at it like that, it's not that surprising.
It makes sense. So question for you, if people are thinking, okay, they want to lose fat, so let me do cardio. I've experienced this myself, where if I do cardio, and I used to do a lot of cardio, it increases my appetite and I go binge on food. So how do you balance that equation? Is it lift weights, eat higher protein, and then you're going to have body recomposition, you're going to look better, and you're going to have less body fat? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'll say if your goal is to change your body, which I think that's 99% of the people who are asking these questions, like, what should I do to be more toned, is like the language they would use. My advice would be lift weights. Lift weights as your primary form of exercise. Now that doesn't mean don't do cardio, like walk. I think you should try to get a given amount of steps every day. And if you can't, I mean, if you enjoy it, do extra cardio conditioning. I always try to tell people, do something where you get out of breath every day, like where you're like winded, like now you're improving your VO2 max, your aerobic capacity. But changing one's body, weightlifting is that would be the best mode. And what else do we know about lifting weights? Well, now that I'm getting older, I want to prevent, or I'm dealing more with people that are older, and we know we lose bone mineral density. Well, weightlifting is awesome at preventing that. We also know that we lose lean mass as we age, and lean mass and and bone mineral density are directly correlated. So if we can build muscle or just maintain muscle, we're also helping our bone mineral density, makes us more insulin sensitive, etc. So while I'm very pro resistance training, I do not want to denigrate cardio. Do cardio as well.
I think sometimes we hear like, don't do cardio and do all the weights, or don't do weights and do all the cardio. I think it's a balance of both. So question for lifting weights, how many reps should somebody do when they're lifting the weights for women and men, for example?
So just to make sure we're all on the same page, when we say reps, we're going to pick up a weight. Let's just say the weight's 30 pounds. And the question is, how many times should I lift this before I put it back down? Is that what? Okay. Well, one, find the number that you want to lift it. Do you like it doing it 8 times? 8. Do you like it 20 times? Do it 20. So what do you prefer doing? But the most important thing about how I answered that is you have to lift that weight until you cannot lift it anymore, or very close to that. So if I pick up this, what did we say, 30-pound weight, whatever the exercise is, I'm going to lift it until I cannot lift it for maybe 1 or 2 more times. So it has to be very hard to lift whatever weight we're doing at the end of that set. I would suggest as just a general good number, 10, if I'm going to give one, 10 reps. 10 is not so light that we're getting all this lactic acid, which burns and makes us feel pain. And it's not so heavy that we're going to increase like joint pain after the exercise. And again, young people don't ever think about joint pain. Older people starting lifting have to consider this. So around 10 reps, but if you like to lift 20, great. Just make sure that by the time you get to that 20th rep, you can't do 22 or 25 reps. If you like to do 5 reps, great. Just make sure you couldn't do 10 and you just stop at 5.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think 10 is that really nice sweet spot that it doesn't get too boring like 20, because you really have to push till 2 reps in reserve until you hit failure. Not failure, but 20, it's pretty hard to get there. Unless you're doing something like shoulders or like a smaller muscle where you need those lighter weights. But I'm interested in weight training, so hence why I asked the question. But I think that was a really good wrap up in terms of protein, the importance of protein, a bit of caffeine, and how people can exercise and move in a way that's designed for fat loss. If people do that, I think that they're going to get the best results. What do you think the number one mistake is that people make if they want to lose fat?
Being impatient, just thinking, oh, my body's different, or this isn't working. So fat loss it's slow. It doesn't happen. And I know this because I struggle with this, and I go all over the world and speak about fat loss. So I know the research. I would like to think better than almost everybody. And yet when I go on a diet, I'm like, what's wrong? I have those demons. So I can't imagine people who don't read the research. So I would say the most important thing is being patient. And I would say this, and everybody's going to hate me after I say this. You can't say that your diet is not working, and you can't say that your body is something wrong with you until you followed whatever diet you say you're going to follow for 4 straight weeks and you followed it perfectly. If you do that, I will promise you will have noticed fat loss. And if I'm wrong, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with you, the diet, etc. If you followed it perfectly for 4 consecutive weeks.
Brilliant advice. On that note, Dr. Campbell, thank you so much. I'm going to leave all your info in the show notes. People can check you out. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today in this episode with Dr. Bill Campbell. Now, if you love this episode, check out this one by Dr. Donald Layman. It is all about protein, the timing, and everything that you need to know more about protein, especially if your goal is aging well, fat loss, and your health. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.